Great. Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Tom Fryer, and today Tom Szabo and I are going to provide a introduction to vRealize automation in our webinar series. So thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. There's going to be, I believe, a Q&A at the end. And if you have any questions, you can put them in chat. There's also going to be some resources at the end of the presentation if you want to get in touch with us to have a one-on-one discussion around vRealize. So ultimately, if you're not familiar with vRealize automation, it's our modern infrastructure automation platform. And what it's doing for a lot of our customers is really increasing their productivity and agility by removing or reducing the complexity and eliminating the manual or semi-manual tasks in your IT infrastructure. There's a tremendous amount of benefits. Today is kind of just an intro to vRealize 101. And again, thank you for joining us. And we hope this is worth your while. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate kicking that off. So thanks again for joining, everyone. My name is Tom Szabo. I'm a staff solutions architect at VMware. Focuses on cloud management in our vRealize platform. So this is a long-awaited continuation of the PowerBlock series that I had been running. Had to put it on hiatus for a little while, just due to, we'll just say, workload. So the idea behind the PowerBlocks is, hey, pick a topic, we go in. The idea behind this session is not to kill anyone with slides. Just do a couple of a couple of slides to just kind of level set, talk through some use cases, and then jump into an environment and actually take a look at what we were just talking about. So as you could see, just rough agenda. I'm going to talk through a little bit around vRealize automation, what it is, use cases that are associated with it, an actual customer example, some details around a customer I was working with over the past year where they were moving to a self-service model, for their IT services. So we'll talk through some of what their approach was prior to starting to move to more of a self-service approach, and where it's going from there. And then we'll jump into an actual demo, take a look at vRealize automation, deploy a workload so we could see, how that works, just choosing some options and watching it deploy based on what we selected. Walk through the different components that are part of vRealize automation, because even though it's a, technically a single product, there's actually different services that make up the product. And there's good reason for that. It comes down to use case and who's actually consuming the capabilities, the functions of vRealize automation. Like Tom mentioned, there is a Q&A button. By all means, if you have any questions, feel free to place them into Q&A. That would be better than using the chat, simply because it's a little bit of more of a queuing mechanism, so I can answer any questions as they come up. So, like I said, just starting with some basic slides, just to kind of level set and explain where vRealize automation fits into the overall VMware software-defined data center strategy, what we're bringing to the table from a capabilities to our customers' perspective. Don't have a lot of time to go through all of this, but at the end of the day, a large percentage of our customers are running vSphere in some form or flavor in an on-premises data center, right? So just thinking about everything that vSphere does, abstracting out underlying compute, brings in HA, vMotion, easy replication. You can stand up, you could use vSphere templates. Everything that around vSphere, we're also doing that with other facets of the data center, and just technologies that are associated with the data center, storage. So moving into more of a hyper-converged perspective, storage, policy-driven management of storage, network and security, taking constructs that were traditionally tied to physical devices, firewalls, load balancers, switches, routers, moving that into software, running it inside of our vSphere hypervisor, opening up all sorts of different use cases, maybe, being able to, create networks on the fly as you're creating virtual machines, wrap distributed firewalls, around VMs, everything that we can do from, just taking network functionality and putting it inside of the hypervisor. So the reason why we've been doing this is, number one, to be able to take our platform, move it into public cloud. So we've partnered with hyperscalers like AWS, Azure, GCP, Oracle, the list goes on, where, it's that same VMware platform running in a hybrid cloud scenario where, it opens up DR, use cases, being able to rapidly extend and expand your data center rather than going through the traditional, hey, we need to procure hardware, rack and stack, build up, ESXi, the vSphere environment before we could even start using it. In more of a hybrid cloud approach with VMware Cloud, you can have a full, VMware-based software-defined data center up within a matter of hours rather than the weeks and months it takes, in more of the traditional approach, if you will. And then also, certainly, a lot of our customers are leveraging the public cloud in one form or fashion, again, where the use case makes sense, whether it's, net new applications, bringing data closer to consumers, maybe, hey, we need new presence in a different geography and we don't want to spin up a whole new data center, lots of different use cases for the public cloud. Regardless, where the vRealize cloud management platform comes in is to provide a common platform, a management overlay over this infrastructure. So wherever you're running your workloads, whether, be it virtual machines, containers, the vRealize platform sits over the top of this infrastructure and helps you, operate, monitor, and automate, your overall platform and start to be able to deliver a, more of an IT services model on top of it. So some of my previous power blocks have really focused on vRealize operations and this self-driving operations tier up here, which is really all about visibility into your workloads, into your infrastructure, making sure things are performing, good capacity planning, troubleshooting, use cases like that. So today we're going to be focusing primarily on this second tier, programmable provisioning, which is really where vRealize automation comes into play. So there's a slew of functionality that comes in this tier that we're going to unpack and explore, and hopefully at the end of this webinar, if I do a good job, have a better understanding of some of what we're bringing to the table from a vRealize automation perspective. At the end of the day, the big thing to remember here in regards to this management platform, cloud is here. It doesn't always necessarily have to mean public cloud. It certainly mean, hey, we're just modernizing our approach to what we're doing on-prem. Really, our overall strategy when it comes to this management platform is not that cloud is necessarily a specific place. It's more an operating model. Like Tom mentioned at the beginning, trying to be as agile and efficient as you can possibly be when it comes to managing your infrastructure, and also, deploying and running workloads on top of that infrastructure. Right. So introducing vRealize automation, for anyone that's been familiar with the vRealize platform and VRA, so if I say VRA, it's just a short acronym for vRealize automation, so I'm not just throwing random acronyms at you. It's a product that's been in our solution set for quite some time, at least a decade, I would say. Approximately 2 years ago, we realized, hey, we need to revamp this product. It's not just a vSphere world. The public cloud is, consumption rates are growing. There's a lot of new capabilities. Infrastructure as code was really coming to the forefront. Talk more about that. So we basically completely from the ground up redesigned the platform. Number one, a big focus of our time and attention was let's make it as easy to install and start using as possible. Older versions of vRealize automation, it could take some time just to have the platform up and running before you can actually start, actually automating things. So our driving, our overall initiative was, hey, let's make sure we make it as easy to install as possible, allow people to start leveraging it, and also make sure that we can automate and deploy workloads to public clouds as easily as we can deploy to vSphere. So from an easy install perspective and just what the form factor looks like, we have two different approaches. We have, it's available as a service. So where we run vRealize automation for you, you do not need to worry about the care and feeding of it. Hey, get it up and running, subscribe to it. Once you start, you can come in and start building out your constructs, templates, start automating things without needing to worry about actually standing up and maintaining the platform itself. We can also, it's also offered in an on-prem format where you can install and run inside of your own data center. It's a self-contained appliance, running Kubernetes underneath the covers. So, it's easy to upgrade, fairly resilient as far as needing to bring, hey, if something happens, we can recover, a Kubernetes pod, have it back up and running. To have more of an enterprise approach with high availability. You can stand up 3 of the appliances, put a load balancer in front of it. The 3 appliances will communicate with each other. Much easier to stand up. The actual install process is something called Easy Installer, which essentially rolls out something called vRealize Lifecycle Manager, which helps do the deployment for you. You make a bunch of options inside of a wizard, and then a workflow gets created, and it does the install for you. So very straightforward and nice and easy to get up and running and start leveraging one way or the other. So one of the primary use cases and one of the main reasons that most of our vRealize automation customers are actually leveraging this tool is that it provides self-service. So anything that you create from an automation perspective, whether it's, hey, we want to deploy a Windows server, a Linux server, maybe a full-blown application. Maybe we just need some processes to run, like a workflow or just a bit of code that we need to fire. The idea here is anything that we create, any curated services that you're consuming, and it doesn't necessarily just have to be, things that we create inside of vRealize automation. For example, we could pull in AWS CloudFormation templates. Let's centralize and curate all of this content that we want to provide to our consumers, whether they're internal developers, lines of business, even just other admins that need to create infrastructure. Being able to put that inside of a self-service catalog that you can wrap governance around, meaning, controls. Hey, who can consume this content? Where can they consume it? Maybe we want to put a lease on it. Maybe we want an approval policy. So that's where self-service really comes into the equation, is allow someone to go in, request what they want, and have it provisioned automatically based on whatever logic that you have set up, and get away from, hey, we put in a ticket, takes 2 weeks as it moves through different departments, different silos, as everyone, does what they need to do to get a particular server or workload ready to be deployed. I actually have an example that we're going to walk through of a customer I worked with, where we could take a look at what their manual approach was versus what they managed to get down to with vRealize automation. So a big way how we actually create the content to place into that self-service catalog is leveraging infrastructure as code. Definitely don't have the time to get into all of the benefits of infrastructure as code, but really, if you're not familiar with the concept, what it really comes down to is, it's a process of managing and provisioning resources through definition files. So those files are typically, they'll either be a YAML file, JSON, but at the end of the day, by defining an environment in code, it starts to open up interesting, capabilities around, really taking good software development principles and applying it to infrastructure. So things like version control, source control, easy replication and testing, reusability, and most importantly, the ability to iterate. Because if you start to go down an automation path and journey, there's a lot of steps involved just in taking a manual process and automating it. And number one is really understanding what those processes are, right? Really working out and understanding, all right, this is exactly what we do, breaking it down, and then, finding the right place to start, figuring out where a bottleneck is in a deployment process, and, automating where it makes sense, and then over time improving upon what you're doing. So, being able to have versioning and iteration as you're building out your infrastructure is really key. So, the big thing I would say from an infrastructure as code perspective is when you define exactly what's going to happen, when I do this deployment, whether it's, again, a server or an application, it's consistent every single time. That's exactly the way that workload, that server is going to be deployed, which opens up a lot from an operational efficiency perspective. So that's a big thing. So at the end of the day, you declare what you want, and then the system will provision based on the instructions that you have inside of that code. And then going forward, maintain the state of those systems that are deployed so that you can look and see, hey, has this drifted from what my initial intent was based on what I built inside of my my IAC. So, being able to declare what you want and then maintain the state of those workloads going forward is a key piece of what we're doing. And we will take a look at this in my environment. The other piece here from a use case perspective is multi-cloud. Hey, I talk to a lot of different customers on a weekly basis, and I hear all kinds of different things, whether maybe they're running dev tests in the cloud, production workloads on-prem. Maybe they have one group that's using public cloud resources, one group that's still using on-prem resources. The idea here is let's curate as much as possible and centralize any of these services that we're leveraging wherever they may end up being deployed. And now you have the logic, the capabilities to say, all right, user Tom wants this Windows or Linux server, and you can make decisions based on capacity, cost, any type of reasoning as to why you want them to deploy in an on-prem environment or into a public cloud environment. And then finally, it's extensible, meaning there's a lot of built-in integrations and services that we can leverage. However, there's an awful lot of different combinations of applications, software, operating systems out there, and just interacting with different devices. So we also have the capabilities where you can interact with other things that aren't necessarily a defined service inside of vRealize automation through workflows, scripts, different bits of code. We'll take a look a little bit around this as well. But the big thing to know is that, the platform is extensible, and essentially, you can automate just about any process that you can come up with. It's just a matter of, figuring out the logic and understanding the right approach. So just some quick benefits. Tom already hinted at some of this, just sticking to the programmable provisioning side here. I mean, really, it's all about just productivity and efficiency, right? Let's make sure that we can stand up a deployment as quickly and consistently as possible. Opening up that self-service means not only can people request resources, but then they also have the ability to take action, day two activities, if you will, on those services that they've provisioned. So it could be things like, being able to take snapshots, being able to reboot, delete, connect to remote consoles, resize, maybe add additional resources if you're going to allow them to do that, more memory, more CPU, more storage. So that's really that self-service model is, hey, somebody's looking for infrastructure, let's get it into their hands as quickly as possible, and then let them do what they need to do with it, but also provide the tools to have good lifecycle management. So like I hinted at leasing before, being able to apply a lease into, let's say, a dev test environment where developers are spinning up VMs to do some type of, either load testing, code testing, whatever they're doing. But let's make sure that we can reclaim those resources. Let's keep an eye on how things are being utilized That way we get out of the age-old problem in IT where, someone requests a resource and then they never want to give it up because they don't want to spend a month waiting to get that resource back in their hands. And then you end up in a scenario where you've got developers saying, hey, I need this. Admin saying, well, what are you actually doing with it? And a lot of finger pointing and workloads just sitting around consuming resources and they're not being used. So making sure that you have good controls in place to understand how the resources that are being spun up are actually being utilized inside of the environment. These details, by the way, there is a total economic impact study that was done by Forrester. It is available on our website, I believe. I do have some links to, kind of getting started, getting deeper at the end of the presentation. And I believe one of the links would have that study if anyone is interested. So just jumping in here, I know this is really difficult to see, and that's actually kind of the point. So this is an actual example, a workflow. So all these little blue envelopes are actually tickets. I've removed the name of the customer, so we'll let them remain anonymous here, where this was the actual workflow to get some infrastructure, just to get a server up and running and hand off to a developer. On the left-hand side here, these are the different, silos or departments, if you will, security, networking, systems, middleware, of everyone that needed to actually touch the deployment as it moved through their process. So this was the way things were when we first got engaged, just looking at their, basically their ticketing process of how they were provisioning infrastructure. Luckily, they had a very smart gentleman that was able to spend the time and talk to the different groups and really dig in and understand what everyone was doing at every step of the way and why they were doing, certain processes. And there was actually a couple of people inside the organization that all they were doing was literally just making sure that tickets were created throughout this process. So a big thing was freeing those folks up to actually do other things than just monitoring tickets. So moving to self-service, and again, I know this is difficult to see, but hopefully the idea here is, kind of simple here. This is represents the end user and what they were doing. We're going to take a look at this in my environment in just a moment from a self-service consumption perspective. Essentially, what we were able to do was create a template that consolidated all of those tickets, pulling IP addresses, deploying to specific network segments, applying tags, making sure if it was a PCI related workload, it ended up in the right segment, joining it to the appropriate domain. That was another particular interesting challenge with this customer, is that they were running 10 different Active Directory domains, and based on what they were doing, it had to join different ones. So we were able to take all of the logic that was inside of those tickets and bring it into a template that we created that could then be presented in a self-service model. Customer logs in, they choose what they need to based on different selections that we were providing them. At that point, maybe there was an approval policy that was assigned, maybe not, depending on where they were deploying, and it would kick off and start to deploy their infrastructure. And then within a short amount of time, they would actually have the deployment up and running. So with that, we're going to jump into demo one of my live environment here and get us out of PowerPoint slides. So what we're going to do is just walk through the vRealize automation, the different components that make it up. As I hinted at earlier, there are different services. Take a look at self-service consumption, how to actually consume a resource. Then we'll pull back the covers a little bit, talk about how it works, how you set it up, working with some templates, touch on extensibility, touch on being able to create, potentially an infrastructure pipeline, so to take it beyond templates, and then also talk about SaltStack, which was a recent acquisition of ours, and what it actually brings to the table and what it can do, as long as we have enough time here today. Bear with me for just a second. Of course, I timed out while I was talking. log back in. So what I'm doing right now is I'm logging into vRealize automation. You'll notice we do integrate with Active Directory. We can integrate with different directories, single sign-on. Basically, we're using something called Identity Manager behind the scenes, and that's what's handling, hey, you can certainly use local users if you wanted to, or if you want to tie to an existing directory service, you certainly can. So logging in here, I'm presented with the Cloud Services console. So in this particular case, I have quite a bit of access. So I'm seeing all of the services that make up vRealize automation. So there are a few different services here. So one is Cloud Assembly. We'll go into this a little bit later to look to see where we actually build out some of those templates. So going back to that example I was just showing, where you can create your content, where you can manage your infrastructure. And this is really, I'd say that the majority of the work that you actually do inside of vRealize automation is likely done inside of Cloud Assembly. We'll take a good look at that. Service Broker here, this is the service catalog. So really more of end user facing, if you will, where consumers, whoever's going to consume these services, they connect into the service catalog. That's where they're presented with services they can consume, and that's where they would be spending the majority of their time, from a self-service perspective. CodeStream is an infrastructure pipeline tool where you can take, for example, services that we're creating inside of Cloud Assembly and create a pipeline where now you can have different stages and tasks associated with deployments where, hey, maybe we want to deploy a Linux server. So we're going to deploy a Linux server, and after it's deployed, maybe we want to SSH into it and run some bash scripts. Maybe we want to tie into something like Jenkins where, hey, now we have our deployment. We're going to kick off a Jenkins pipeline to do an application install on top of what that content that was created. So a lot of functionality here. Don't know if we're going to have enough time to really dig into that today, but certainly, if you're looking for pipeline capabilities, CodeStream is definitely something to check out. Orchestrator, vRealize Orchestrator, it's a component of VMware, vSphere, for all intents and purposes, has been around for a long time. It's really a workload tool, right? So you can drag and drop different workflows. So you can create rather complex, automate and create complex IT tasks that go beyond just creating virtual machines. As an example, again, maybe we want to create a Windows server, and then part of that process is joining it to the domain, joining it to an Active Directory domain, dropping it into a specific OU, and maybe adding a specific user or group of users to local administrator, as an example. So with Orchestrator, that's where we could start to take some of those Active Directory processes and tie it to what we automated inside of Cloud Assembly and vRealize automation. SaltStack is a powerful configuration management tool. It's designed for hybrid or public cloud or any virtualized environment. So essentially, it's a remote command and execution tool, and it also allows you to basically apply what we call states to VMs. So same thing here. Let's say you deploy a Linux or a Windows server, and you want a particular configuration to be applied. Maybe it's going to be a web server, and we want Apache configured a certain way. Maybe we actually want to pull in, the HTML files, everything that's going into creating that website. We can define all of that inside of SaltStack, and then, as something is deployed, apply that state, and now it's, once it's deployed, it's completely ready to go and configured the way you see fit. So we will hopefully take a look at this as well. So with that, let's go into Service Broker and actually kick off a deployment and get started. So just as a quick recap here, this is the service catalog that an end user would be logging into and consuming. Everything that you see here, by the way, we're looking at the GUI. It is also available via API. So, one, this can be consumed via API, and it's also a common use case would be a lot of my customers have, ServiceNow deployed as an example, as an ITSM product, maybe Jira, where they have a ticketing system. So you can interact with, either rather than having two catalogs now, if you have a ServiceNow catalog, you can take these constructs and present them inside of ServiceNow, or you can tie, somebody puts in a ticket in Jira, call an API inside of vRealize automation to kick off a deployment. So based on who I am, when I log in, we have the concept of something called projects behind the scenes, which ties an end user to the resources that they can leverage. So, whether it's a vSphere cluster, AWS region, however we're carving up our, the infrastructure we can deploy workloads on. And then I'm being presented with a catalog of items that I can actually deploy. So in this case, I have a CodeStream pipeline I can kick off or I can request. I have a Kubernetes namespace I can create, so we can interact with Tanzu, our Kubernetes offerings, to do things like create namespaces, create Kubernetes clusters, constructs like that. Or in this case, just a cloud template that we've created with vRealize automation. So I'm going to request this just to give you an idea of what this looks like. So this is a load balanced OpenCart multi-VM deployment. So by clicking request, now I have my my request form opened up here. If I had different versions of the application, they'd be listed here. If I was entitled to consume other versions, if I was a member of multiple projects, I can assign a particular project. I'm only a member of one here. Need a deployment name. Let's put something in that I know I haven't used. Here we have node sizes. So as I mentioned, this is a multi-VM deployment. Part of the idea here with node sizes is, again, if you're trying to keep things consistent, you could certainly give somebody the option to choose how many vCPUs, how much memory they want, storage. That's not a problem. But again, trying to be consistent, going with t-shirt sizing means, your deployments are going to look and feel a certain way. The other thing that we can do, if we jump down here for a second, you can see I can select which environment I want to deploy to. In this case, I have 3 different zones I could deploy to: an AWS zone, an Azure zone, and a vSphere zone. So on the back end, we have mappings that say, what small means in a vSphere environment, what it means in an AWS environment. So maybe it's a small is 1 vCPU and 1 gig inside of vSphere, and maybe it's a particular instance type for EC2 inside of AWS. So it's part of how we can abstract out the differences between the different platforms. I'm just going to go with small here today. You can also give an option of image, which image we want to deploy. In this case, I only have an Ubuntu 16 option. So same thing on the back end. This would point to a specific vSphere template, an AMI, an Azure template. Again, whatever you're actually trying to deploy. We're going to inject a username and password for me while we deploy here. And then, what my front end cluster size is going to be. Go with small, and we'll just deploy to vSphere. So once I choose my criteria, and this is completely customizable based on your needs, what type of options you want to let somebody choose, you can click submit. And at this point, maybe I have an approval policy assigned where somebody has to approve it, but I shouldn't have any approval policies in this environment. So at this point, it should just start to kick off. While that's running, we're going to take a look at Cloud Assembly. So another service to actually look and see how we create something like that. You can see I can still see the deployment, just a little bit of a different viewpoint. If I go to my infrastructure tab here, this is where we're managing the infrastructure that we have access to. So we have the concept of cloud accounts. You can see I've got my vCenter, an AWS account, an Azure account. So these are endpoints where we can actually deploy. We can then further take these endpoints and divide them up into specific zones, so that if you remember from that screen, I had some resources that I was, the previous screen, I had resources that I had access to. You can zone it up and control exactly, what kind of resources an end user can consume. I'll quickly touch on integrations, because this is another key piece beyond just deploying, virtual machines, let's say, being able to integrate with other components. Hey, maybe you're already using Ansible today and you have a bunch of Ansible playbooks that you're manually running against servers that you're creating. So we can take those Ansible playbooks, we're not saying start over, and apply and tie them to a virtual machine, where when the VM gets deployed, after deployment, it'll register with the Ansible control host and run a specific playbook based on what you have available and what options you're giving to people. So these are just a list of some of the different integrations we have. GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, that's all around source and version control, taking blueprints and templates outside of the product. I'm going to switch over to the design tab. And we'll take a quick look at the blueprint that I just kicked off. Give you an idea of what this looks like. So when I clicked into the template, what opens up here is this is our essentially our template designer. So on the left-hand side are all of the different types of resources that we can interact with and model out inside of a template. So we have our agnostic blueprints. That's how this particular blueprint is agnostic, where we're given the choice of where we want to deploy it to, different platforms. We have specific vSphere VMs, AWS services, not just EC2, native cloud services that we can interact with. There's some of our config management, being able to interact with, let's say, Ansible, for example, GCP, Azure. So essentially, you can drag these constructs over onto the canvas. And as you drag it over, you now have a visual representation of what the deployment looks like. And on the right-hand side, this is the actual code. So this is, that YAML file that I was talking about from an infrastructure as code perspective, where you're defining, my mouse goes crazy here, exactly what's happening based on the individual components. So in this case, it's my SQL server. You can see it's a cloud machine. We're taking those inputs. If you recall, I was able to choose small, medium, and large, an image, taking the information from that input screen and applying it to, the actual deployment. It kicks off, and then we have, essentially the instructions on what exactly is going to happen once we kick off this deployment as it's running through, an individual deployment. This is rather complex. There's multiple VMs, a lot going on inside of it. It doesn't have to be nearly as in-depth to get started. I'll just show you really quickly. Do a blank canvas. Let's not say test, we'll say demo. Apply it to a project. Now I have a blank canvas starting from scratch. Let's just say I want to use a vSphere machine. Drag it over. You can see my code started to populate. At this point, I'm looking for some very basic information. All right, I have a vSphere machine. What image do we want to use? So what vSphere template do I want to deploy on top of it? I have those mappings already from my infrastructure perspective, where components where I can map out existing vSphere templates. So let's just say I choose Ubuntu here. I can set my CPU count and my memory if I wanted to. We'll just leave this alone for all intents and purposes at the moment. And now I can click test. And what this is going to do now is just look and see, okay, is my YAML okay? Do I have an image mapping? Do I have the resources available inside it? And do I have a vSphere environment tied to Tom Szabo that I can consume this on? In this case, it was successful. Yes. And this is one of my one of my favorite features of this is we can actually look at a provisioning diagram where we can look and see, okay, based on that request, what we requested here. So it's an allocation. I want a vSphere VM. What image, resources? Do I have any constraints? No. I tied it to my, the project that I'm associated with. So essentially the group I'm in, and it shows the different zones I have access to, any limits or resource limits I have. Luckily in this environment, I'm fairly open. I don't have a lot of limits. And then you can see where vRealize Automation is making decisions based on those resources. Again, hey, do I have mappings, large, small, medium? Yes. Do I have an Ubuntu 18 template ready to go inside of this vSphere environment? Yes. And I have a cloud zone that matches exactly what I'm looking for. And you could see where it would actually deploy this machine if I actually did a full-blown deployment instead of just a test. Show one other piece here from an extensibility perspective. So this gets into just going beyond just deploying infrastructure. So this is essentially an if this then that engine that's built inside of vRealize Automation. So just real quickly, just to give you an idea of how we can extend the capabilities of just doing deployments. In this case, I have a subscription set up that says rename VM. So what this is doing, the logic behind this is that there are different life cycle stages of virtual machines or infrastructure as it's getting created. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm basically looking for anytime I deploy VMs from a particular blueprint, I just want to run a script, either it could be a Python script, PowerShell script, VRO workflow. In this case, I have a script that's going to rename the VM to a specific naming convention that I want to leverage, and just enable it. And now whenever anyone deploys anything from that particular blueprint, the script is going to run and rename the VM based on whatever logic I have inside of my script to rename the VM. So there's a lot here, as you can imagine. I might do another power block just on this at some point in time. Just wanted to give you a quick idea of what, from an extensibility perspective, the types of things that we can do. And you can even just see some of the workflows that we have, different workflows that are available that you can add in and run. And there's literally hundreds of them out of the box, and you can certainly create your own as well. Jump to CodeStream really quickly, just to give you an idea of what this is. So I mentioned being able to take things a step further, where now maybe you create infrastructure pipelines. So I'll just open one of these up really quickly. So here you can see we've modeled out an actual pipeline of, hey, different tasks that we want to have happen in a specific order. Maybe we want to gate them from stage to stage. So in this case, this is a full-blown pipeline. Spins up a Docker container to do some to actually do some Docker builds. I'm going to build some containers, and then actually create a Kubernetes namespace and inject those containers into them. So you can see here, this is just SSHing into a container and running commands. Just wanted to give you an idea of some of the different actions that we can take. It could be deploying a template, hey, kick off based on a specific condition, run a nested pipeline, run Kubernetes commands, run REST, interact with REST APIs, SSH commands, PowerShell commands. So extremely powerful as far as being able to run tasks either sequentially or parallel, in a parallel fashion, based on, again, whatever you're trying to prove out and whatever processes you're looking to accomplish. Beyond actually being able to create and run the pipeline, the other bit of information is actually being able to understand, hey, are we having successful executions? In this case, this one hasn't been running because this environment was just recreated last night. How often has it ran? Is it running successfully? Are we failing? When does it fail? So that way, again, as you're, when it comes to pipelines and automation, iterating, doing testing, being able to understand, are we getting success or failures? Final piece of vRealize automation is SaltStack configuration. So as I mentioned, if I didn't mention, we acquired SaltStack about a year ago at this point, give or take, maybe a little less than that. Extremely powerful software. Essentially, it's config management and remote command execution. So anyone that owns vRealize automation today is entitled to SaltStack. It is also available on its own. What you're looking at here is the interface, which over time will be rolled in on a continuous basis into vRealize automation, where it's a little more seamless, if you will. We're already starting to enter it where you click this and it's going to jump you to SaltStack, but it is still slightly a separate interface. And what you could see here is there's the concept of minions. So these are actually servers or workloads that are running. There's a small agent that runs, connects back to a master server, and there's a message bus that's always running. So what makes that really powerful is now with that message bus, we can look for specific events and react against them. Run jobs, run commands, apply different states to the individual VMs. So here, just to give you a quick idea, I've got different targets based on operating system. I have a Windows server here, got a few Linux servers, or I can look at everything that's out here. In this case, just to give you an idea of some of the capabilities, I'm just going to run a basic command on all of my minions. One will fail because I know this is offline at the moment. So what we're going to do is run remote commands on those minions, and they are different operating systems. So Linux and Windows in particular. So normally when I'm running a netstat, you can run netstat on any operating system. You would need to use somehow SSH into the Linux servers and use a bash command. Windows, use WinRM or have some sort of way to interact with PowerShell or the actual command shell on Windows. In this case, we're abstracting out those layers. I have a function, I'm going to say run.command. Salt has the logic to understand how to take this argument, netstat-an, use bash on the Linux side, use PowerShell on the Windows side, reach out to those minions, those agents, and run the command. So I'm just doing something basic just so it runs relatively quickly and you can see what I'm talking about. So we can come down here and we can see that job that I just kicked off, that command.run function. It's queued, should start running in just a second. There we go. Give it a second longer, and we'll get our output back from that command. Success, and you can see I have, it's taking a minute because I have one that's offline. That should be good in just a second, and then we'll be able to look and see the output. There we go, and its status is partial because of the one didn't return any values. Now we can take a look in here, and we can see, here's my netstat results from my CentOS server. Here's a Windows server. You can see the different formatting based on netstat. So again, fairly simple demo, but just wanted to give you an idea of some of the capabilities around this, where hey, we sent that netstat, didn't care what the operating system was, didn't care what was going on. It went out, Salt went out, ran the command, brought the results back. Now we can download those results as a JSON file, manipulate them however it makes sense from a reporting or usability perspective. I will do additional sessions on SaltStack to dig into some of the capabilities, but extremely powerful tool from a remote command execution, and also being able to, again, apply particular states to an operating system or any device that, for all intents and purposes, that we can interact with. Like you can see, I have an Apache job that if I ran this, it would actually install Apache on this particular server, the way I saw fit. how I've configured it, how I'm expecting it to run. So I know I just went through quite a few different components inside of vRealize Automation. Wanted to give you, again, just an idea of what it looked like, some of the capabilities. I will do additional sessions to dig deeper into the individual components, talk more about templating, talk about, different integrations, how we can extend the capabilities of it. Just wanted to give you, again, the idea here was some 101 level, just take a look at vRealize Automation, understand some of the use cases. At the end of the day, the big thing to remember is vRealize Automation in regards to the overall capabilities of the vRealize suite. We're sitting right here from a deployment perspective. Let's interact with, cloud constructs, vSphere, AWS, via APIs, and then let's start to create content and allow us to provision and orchestrate that content on top of our platforms wherever they may be. Some additional resources. Everyone that's on the call today, I will send out a recording and this deck, just so you have some, again, some follow-up information. Certainly Tom and I are available if you want to go deeper, have a conversation about automation, whatever you want, just let us know. A couple of other resources that I think are really helpful. VMware Hands-On Labs, every product we have is available to take for a test drive. Highly recommend spending time here. We have VMware Pathfinder. So this is a new approach that we're taking to curating content, centralizing it. So this particular link goes into vRealize Automation and some of the different capabilities. So there's use case documentation, videos, I think even links to Hands-On Labs, all sorts of different content to get enabled and dig deeper into the capabilities. We have a cloud management YouTube channel, all sorts of different topics and products covered here. And I also have my own YouTube channel where I upload these recordings that you're welcome to consume. Currently, the majority of what's out here is vRealize Operations. I will add this video to it as well. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining our webinar today. Hopefully it was helpful. I know I threw an awful lot at you quickly. Again, just the idea was a little intro to vRealize Automation and get just some food for thought, being able to get started with it. So thanks a lot. If anyone has any questions, you can drop them into Q&A. Feel free to reach out to Tom and I will send out a follow-up email with the video, the recording of the video and this slide deck.
And this is Tom. Just thank you everybody for joining us. And as Tom said, please reach out to us with anything that you need, and we will follow up with you guys ASAP. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, no problem. I do see, I see one question come in so far.
Yep.
Question was, what version of vRealize Automation is needed to interact with the public cloud constructs? And that is vRealize Automation Enterprise. I did not get into different levels of licensing or anything like that today, but there are different levels. And really what it comes down to is just making sure that we can right size our customers from a licensing perspective based on what it is that they're actually trying to solve for and do. So that's why we have different versions like that.
Hey, Tom, there was actually another question in the chat around capabilities from Martin Green. Can you see that?
Yeah. I was just looking at that right now. If Martin is still on, hopefully that helped a bit, just understanding the use cases and some of the capabilities. If it didn't, let me know, and we will definitely dig in deeper for and answer any remaining questions that you may have. All right. Well, thanks again for joining. Hope everyone has a nice day, and we'll talk soon. Take care.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody.